This is why you should never go on a subway again. So what happened is that one night, a teenage girl was taking the subway home from work back to her house in New York. The scary part is when she went on board, she sat directly across from two men with a woman sitting in the middle. The creepy part is that the woman kept staring at her and wouldn't even blink, while the two men never once looked at her. Well, at the next stop, a man with a trench coat walked in, but the girl didn't pay much attention to him. The girl kept trying to look away so that one lady wouldn't stare at her, but she just kept looking, wouldn't even blink. Well, at the next stop, that random man with the trench coat pulled out the teenage girl and dragged her out of the subway. She was screaming, asking for help because she had no idea why this guy just pulled her out. But the guy told her to calm down and said he actually saved her life because the woman that was staring at her was actually dead, and the two men next to her were holding her up to make her look alive. The random guy with the trench coat said if he didn't pull her out, she was going to be their next victim.
A 6th grade teacher asked her class the other day how many of them were Trump fans. And most of them, not knowing what a Trump fan was and of course wanting to be liked by their teacher, they all raised their hands. Well, all except for little Johnny. The teacher looks over at little Johnny and says, "Johnny, why are you being different again?" And he says, "Well, because I'm not a Trump fan." And she says, "Well, why are you not a Trump fan?" And he says, "Because I'm a Democrat." She says, "Really, why are you a Democrat?" He says, "Well, my mom's a Democrat and my dad's a Democrat, so I'm a Democrat." She says, "Oh, really? Well, what if your mom was a moron and your dad was an idiot? What would that make you?" Johnny smiles and says, "A Trump fan."
This lady's sitting on the couch in the living room. She hears a knock on the door. She gets up, she answers it, and there's a guy standing there. And he goes, "Excuse me, miss, do you have a vagina?" She slams the door. The next morning, she's sitting on the couch, knock on the door, answers it, same guy. "Excuse me, miss, do you have a vagina?" She slams the door. Later that night, her husband comes home from work. He tells her what happened. He goes, "Listen, you know what, honey? I'm going to take off for work tomorrow in case this guy comes back." The next morning, they're sitting on the couch, knock on the door. They both get up and go to the door. The husband says, "All right, listen, I'm going to stand behind the door. If he asks that question again, you say yes. I want to see where he's going with this." She goes, "Okay." She answers the door. Guy says, "Excuse me, miss, do you have a vagina?" And she goes, "Yes, I do." And he goes, "Good. Can you tell your husband to stop using my wife's and start using yours?"
I am going to be telling you the story of the Silent Twins by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. When the girls were toddlers, they barely ever talked, but the pediatrician said that it was common for twins to be behind in communication skills compared to other children. By the time they were in elementary school, they would only say one-word sentences every couple days. Jennifer would write at the level she was supposed to, but June would not. They started to be bullied in school for not talking, which led them to become so quiet they stopped talking to their family. The mother would listen in on them, and she could hear them constantly talking to each other behind closed doors. So they could talk, but the parents said it sounded like a foreign language. They then started walking in a single line with each other. They looked exactly matched up. The feet hitting the ground at the same time, the arms swinging at the same time. They would stand up and sit down at the same time. Each bite of food and each drink would be taken at the same time. They were perfectly mirroring each other in every single movement. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of the story, The Silent Twins, by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. Every movement they made was slow in order to perfectly mirror each other. They would not even leave each other's side to use the bathroom. An actual doctor finally gets involved in the situation when he visits the school to administer tuberculosis shots to all the students. When he gave the shots to the twins, neither of them even showed any reaction to the shot, like they were in a trance. Many doctors and teachers thought that June was being controlled by Jennifer through mind control. One doctor even noted that it looked like June wanted to say something, but Jennifer would glare at her and June would go back to mirroring Jennifer. When they turned 14, they were transferred to a special ed program, but they were still silent. They would not talk. Eventually, therapists made the decision to separate the twins, but the twins hated this idea so much and decided to finally break their silence in order to not be separated. Stay tuned for part 3. This is part 3 of The Silent Twins by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. The girls finally broke their silence after their therapist got a call from a payphone that said, quote, "Good evening, Mr. Thomas, this is the twins. We are really sorry about what happened today. If you don't separate us, we'll start talking next week." End quote. So, they could talk. But when the twins got back to school, they acted like the phone call didn't happen. So they decided to send one of the twins away. When they told the twins one of them was going to be sent away, Jennifer screamed and lunged at June and dug her nails into June's cheek. They started attacking each other. They finally sent June away to a boarding school, and Jennifer stayed at the same school. At June's new school, she wouldn't talk. She started to refuse to move, eat, and drink. All she did was cry. The school couldn't continue force-feeding her, so they sent June back to be with Jennifer. Stay tuned for part 4. This is part 4 of the story of the silent twins, by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. Once they sent June to be back with Jennifer, the staff at the school decided to release them from school at only 16 years old. The girls, now having all the free time in the world, started making fantasy lives for their dolls. Every single thing they had their dolls do, both of them had to agree on. Their mom finally decided that it would probably be healthy to give the girls diaries. The girls wrote in the diaries about how they wished they were individuals, but they did not know how to, nor had the strength to. Finally, when they were 17 years old, they decided that they needed to experience life. The best way to do this, they thought, was to get boyfriends. But every time they would encounter boys, they couldn't get up the courage to break their silence. They finally got up the courage to go after the Armstrong boys, who one of them they thought was already in love with them. The boys would drink with the girls, they would smoke with the girls, they would do teenage things. Stay tuned for part 5. This is part 5 of the story of the silent twins by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. While hanging out with the Armstrong boys, due to the excessive drinking and substance use, the girls would be more comfortable with talking. Jennifer proceeded to lose her virginity to one of the boys, making her now different from her sister June, in the first time in their entire lives. Due to this proceeded to make both of them very angry, because they both now did not understand why their entire lives they were trying to be one together and not two separate people. Due to the anger, Jennifer attacked June in their bedroom and tried to strangle her. After they cooled off, they went on a walk, and on their walk, June then decided to push Jennifer off of a bridge. A car's headlights stopped the continued fight. That's when they realized things would never go back to how they were. The girls started to go down from there. They started breaking into places, stealing, committing vandalism. They would even report their own crimes to the police in an American accent. Stay tuned for part 6. This is part 6 of the story of the silent twins by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. The police kind of just ignored their continued crimes because they weren't severe enough for the police investigation. The girls then started to get more comfortable with committing crimes, and one night they decided to light the local tennis courts on fire. The next night they burned down a tractor store, and the next night police caught the girls while they were about to light down another place. The girls were then sent to prison without bail. This is when the girls became completely silent again and started synchronizing their movements again. Their feet moving at the same time, their hands moving at the same time, them sitting down and laying down at the same time, eating at the same time, and drinking at the same time. They also started a starvation pact. One could eat one day, and the other would eat the next day. They were soon sent to the hospital, and the therapist thought it was best to separate the girls once again. This was not healthy for either of the girls. Stay tuned for part 7. This is part 7 of the story of the silent twins by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. Due to the girls starting a starvation pact in prison, they decided it was best to send them to the hospital and separate them. The hospital was taking note of their synchronized movements. If one was eating, so was the other. If one was sleeping, so was the other. If one was reading, so was the other. 7 months later, they were on trial for their arson. They were then convicted of 16 felonies. After their trial, the prison sent them to a psychiatrist where they were then diagnosed with psychopathic personality disorder. The psychiatrist thought it would be best for them to be sent to a psych ward for the criminally insane instead of the prison for the rest of their lives. When the girls were together at the psych ward, they would try to kill each other, but when they were apart, they were so lonely that they wanted to die. June even tried to commit suicide. To that day, still nobody knew why they were silent and why they would copy each other's movements until this girl, Mary Wallace, got involved. Stay tuned for part 8, which is the last part. This is part 8 of the story of the silent twins by the names of June and Jennifer Gibbons. To that day, nobody knew why the twins were silent until a girl named Mary Wallace got involved. She was given access to the girls' diaries, and after reading the diaries, she knew that June and Jennifer did not belong in the psych ward for the criminally insane. Wallace believes that the girls only committed the crimes because it was a cry for help. And the silence the twins possessed was from extreme identity blending. Wallace could also tell that Jennifer was the leader of the two. After being in the psych ward for the criminally insane for 12 years, they finally got a hearing for their release. The twins told Wallace that if they were able to get released, that one of them would die. It was a death pact. The twins were released from the psych ward in 1993. On the way home, Jennifer laid her head on June to sleep. When the bus got to their stop, Jennifer would not wake up. She was pronounced dead the next morning at the hospital. The death pact was fulfilled just like they said. June now lives a normal life going by the name of Allison.